we have with us Bradford Williams, and he is the VP of People Insights, Planning and Analytics. Still didn't get it right, did I? I got it right, yes. Yeah. And he's going to tell us a little bit of story about the name of his team. And he's going to talk to us today about how do you really get at measuring what really matters. And he's going to use an example of succession planning to kind of play out the kind of framework that he's going to share with us today. So please give Bradford a hand.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for having me. I get the privilege of closing us out today, which feels like a huge burden, given all of the great presentations and discussions that have taken place already. On top of that, I recognize that I'm probably standing in the way between you and a nice meal, a cold cocktail, a cold beer. So I will do my best to keep this as engaging as possible. I'm not known as high energy hype man, but I will do my best to keep all of us engaged and active here. So as Michael introduced me, Brad Williams, Bradford Williams, if you want to be formal. The fun fact about my name is it's super common. I've worked at 3 companies now that have had another Brad Williams there, and I'm always the second one to join, and so I'm forced to go by Bradford because the other one gets dibs on Brad Williams. So Bradford Williams, or Brad Williams, I head up our PIPA team at Northwestern Mutual. At Northwestern Mutual, we love acronyms, and so we love branding. And so PIPA is People Insights Planning and Analytics. More commonly, you could call us People Analytics and Workforce Planning. But again, we like branding, we like acronyms, and so I lead the PIPA team at NM. So Northwestern Mutual, if you're not familiar with us, we are a US-based, headquartered in Milwaukee, life insurance company, wealth management company, Fortune, I put myself on the spot with that one, Fortune 111, if I'm not mistaken, $36 billion in revenue, about 8,200 employees. We've been around for 167 years, so a very stable company. I say all of that because it's important context and background for some of the stuff that we'll talk through. And I recognize that all of us come from different organizations or are at different stages in our analytics maturity curve. And so, full caveat here, whatever I'm talking through, whatever I'm recommending might not be the right approach for you, but hopefully spur some ideas, spur some thoughts for your organization and how you can think about things maybe a little bit differently. So let's all close our eyes. It's October 2nd. If your fiscal year runs on a calendar year, it's quarter end. So many of us in this room are probably thinking about quarter end, month end dashboards. What do the numbers look like? So I said, let's close our eyes. We don't really have to close our eyes. I'm a little worried about that activity because it's late in the day and energy might be low. So keep your eyes open. You can close them if you want. But let's imagine a scenario. You're at your desk. You're looking at the latest dashboard. You're looking at the trends. Everything is showing up green. It's lovely, right? You can sit back. You can relax. You're satisfied. It's awesome. Let's fast forward, hypothetical, a couple of weeks, a couple of months later, and all of a sudden, a key leader leaves, a critical project hits an unexpected roadblock, those reassuring metrics that all looked green, all of a sudden didn't warn you. They didn't tell you the whole story. So, what's the point of this? Believe it or not, I advertise myself as not being smart enough to dive into predictive analytics. I let my team kind of run with that. So this is not a presentation on how to predict the future, how to get ahead of all of this, but instead it's meant to talk through, are we measuring the right things and are we thinking about things in the right way? So, unfortunately, since the sinking of the Titanic, this image has probably been flashed once a week in front of your eyes in some form or fashion. Famous iceberg, right? And the idea here is, are your metrics that you're looking at today just scratching the surface? Are they giving you a false sense of security, lulling you to sleep with how great everything is going on in your organization? My argument and my thesis is that some of our most treasured metrics, while necessary, might actually be limiting our understanding of the view of the organization, our talent, or the workforce data. Most of these were developed in a different era of business. They've been around a long time. As I won't go into the whole disruption of AI, technology's moving quickly. We've had a pandemic, we've had the great reshuffling, we've had all of these things. And the metrics may not be keeping up or telling us the whole story of where we're headed. So, what can we do about it? Activity versus impact. This is a slide, forewarning, you're gonna see 3 or 4 times throughout the presentation, so bear with me here. As an aside here, I've been thinking about activity, impact. Many of you are probably in the room right now rolling your eyes like, yep, we understand the difference. Let me tell you a little story about my journey here at Northwestern Mutual. I've been there 4.5 years now. When I joined the organization, we were early on in our analytics journey. And so much of the foundation we were trying to lay was pretty foundational in its nature. We're trying to wrap our arms around all the data that we've got, report out on clean, accurate data, feed the need that people have to know what is headcount, how many people did we hire last month, how many people left last quarter, month, whatever. And so most of my effort was spent on that. More recently, we start to get into the fun, more exciting stuff where we can do more transformational projects, a little bit more strategic projects. One of those that we've been talking about recently is a project called Vision Point. The idea of Vision Point is not super sexy. It's not advanced analytics just yet. But the idea is to create a single hub, a single front door for all things HR, people, data, insights, data literacy as well. Because part of the feedback that I consistently get from our stakeholders, from our users, is all of this data is great. It tells a great story. I don't always know where to find it. I don't always know what to search for. I don't always, like, sometimes you send me PowerPoint decks and they're great, but what I'm really looking for is buried on page 14 in the second column on the right, and I just need that data. I don't want to go in and have to try to find it. So Vision Point came to be the solution of that. We're still building that out. And what I asked my team as that vision, no pun intended of Vision Point, came to light there was, how do we want to think about evolving this? What's our project plan? What are the features, functionality that we want to have? And importantly, how are we going to measure success? I asked my people analytics team, and I'm not disparaging them by any means because they're brilliant, but I asked them, how are we going to measure success on Vision Point? Their answer back to me was, we'll launch Vision Point. That's our success measure. So our success measure and our reason for building Vision Point was to launch it, which in and of itself becomes a very circular argument, right? We're not just launching it because we are bored looking for something to do. We have plenty of other things to be doing. And so I say all of that because this is a people analytics team. We know better. And again, there are brilliant minds. I absolutely love my team. We struggle with defining success, and we struggle with what is activity versus outcome. The slide's fairly descriptive here in, if we're launching a space shuttle, our success criteria is not launching the space shuttle. That's an important milestone. We need to do that. We need to do that successfully. But if our objective in launching a space shuttle is just to launch it, we shouldn't go about that mission. And so I imagine many of you here are already rolling your eyes like, yep, we get it. I don't know why we're talking about this. If all this is about is activity versus outcome, we don't need to be hanging around for the next 20 minutes. We can go grab a cocktail right now. But bear with me. So succession planning. This is an area at Northwestern Mutual near and dear to our hearts here. I'm not disclosing anything, as our media relations team won't let me, that isn't public knowledge, in that right now we're in the middle of a CEO transition. It got announced earlier this year. It's the first time in 15 or 16 years that we're going through that. Exciting time, brings about a lot of change. We're also in the midst of a new head of investments and a new head of HR that have recently been announced. They got announced last week, so this conference is perfect timing because I can talk about it, right? And so succession planning, it's not just something that we care about, obviously, in the C-suite. It's something that we're caring about and thoughtful about throughout the enterprise, certainly at senior leadership levels. So as we think about succession planning, thinking about activity versus outcome, I challenge my team to think through how do we want to think about managing or what our success measures are for succession planning. So I'm not going to play spoiler here. Rather, this is the part where engagement happens, right? So I'm going to ask all of you, just by show of hands, I won't make you stand up and do jumping jacks or anything like that. Just by show of hands, how many of you are measuring succession planning? We can go through the list. So how many are not measuring anything related to succession planning today in your organization? Okay, a handful. The next 4 are not mutually exclusive, so you can keep your hands raised throughout here. How many of you are measuring with the % of roles that have a successor identified? Okay, wonderful. What about successor readiness? All right, and succession slate diversity. All right. How many of you are looking at any other factors, just to catch all? All right. Well, very good. So a good mix. Some people, unsurprisingly, not measuring it today. Some people measuring it in some form or fashion. So I would argue that most of these well-accepted measures of succession are fairly activity-focused. And at best, they are telling us, do we have a ready now, or what's the readiness of a successor? Do we have diversity in the pipeline? But it's an activity focus. So let me give you this example. And I regretted putting the slide together, so bear with me because there is a ton of animation on here, and I'm not sure I'm equipped to just walk all the way through it. So here we go. So we've got, 6 people up there. This is their succession health or their succession pipeline. Looks good. Drawing back on the earlier part of the presentation, this is where you would kick your feet up, look at your metrics and say, we've got a pretty good pipeline built. All of these successors are in place. We can kick our feet up, thumbs up, right? Let's play out a hypothetical scenario here. I imagine all of you can kind of see what's coming, but bear with me. So we've got slates for all these roles. We've got ready now successors for, I guess, all but one of them. And we've got diverse slates throughout each of these 6 roles. So let's fast forward, and all of a sudden, a leader leaves, and somebody moves into that leadership position. Fantastic, right? Our succession plan is working. But that successor that just moved into that role was on 3 other slates. And so all of a sudden, we're starting to get a little shaky. If we're going back to the iceberg example and we're on the Titanic, we're kind of seeing the iceberg ahead, and we're a little bit worried right now. No reason to panic yet, though, right? Unfortunately, the performance of that team, because there wasn't great knowledge transfer, there wasn't technical expertise that was transitioned appropriately, performance starts to drop. Beyond that, we have another successor who wanted that role that just opened up, was already in an attrition risk, and kind of upset that they didn't get it. So they leave the organization. That team's performance drops, it drops, and they leave. So now we look at the succession slate for these 6 roles that once looked green, looked healthy, looked great, and all of a sudden we have a ton of vulnerability in our pipeline. We have 2 teams that are high impact teams that are on shaky ground right now. Their performance is suffering, it's putting key projects at risk. Red alert, right? We're headed towards the iceberg. So what I would say here is what we were doing initially is measuring activity. We were looking at do our successors or do our incumbents have successors identified? Not truly what is the health of those pipelines and what does it mean for our broader leadership transition. So how should we think about this differently? Before I get to how we should think about it differently, you can cue sappy music here. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we're in people analytics. people analytics. Again, maybe it takes on different names at different organizations. Again, I know we call ourselves the PIPA team, so I'm all about branding. But behind all of these metrics, behind all of these numbers are real people. And on one hand, what I just showed was a hypothetical. It's not real people, it wasn't a real scenario. But you can imagine how that plays out and how that feels. We're affecting people's career paths. We're affecting the organizational health of our company. We're affecting performance and the success of our organization. And so I never want to lose sight of the fact that what we look at is people, and we affect people. And so despite all the succession and numbers on a PowerPoint, numbers on a spreadsheet, wherever, we shouldn't lose sight of that. And the way I like to think about it is our organization as an ecosystem. And if we think about it in the context of succession health, if a key species, a key leader, leaves the organization, leaves the ecosystem, what happens to our ecosystem? Does it thrive? Do we run into trouble? And so I tend to think about our ecosystem or our organization as an ecosystem. It's not just about who's next in line, it's about understanding the full spectrum of leadership readiness. So I want to make this as practical as possible for all of us in the room. So I'm going to share what we came up with at NM. And again, our media relations team doesn't want me sharing all of our special blend of herbs and spices. So you'll just see a little bit of a flavor of what that looks like. But it's not just that our media relations team holds my tongue back from time to time. It's also that this should look different for each organization. What matters at NM, what we care about, what succession health means to us is going to likely be different than what it means at your organization or how you think about it. And so you'll see some of the factors that we include in all of this. And what you'll notice is a lot of these things are things that you saw previously when we talked about ways to measure succession health. We're combining them together, we're creating an index, and we're looking at things holistically. And what I will say on this is, we've got maybe 3 or 4 other factors that go in here. It's evolving. It's already gone through iterations. We've launched this to our SLT. We've even launched it to the board. And so far, it's been met with a lot of success. There's still a lot more to add on to it, but I think we're getting to a place where we feel like we're really measuring the health of our succession pipeline, and do we have the leaders ready to take on the next role in the organization. So again, cue back our activity versus impact. So we're shifting from activity to impact. Another area that we're diving into is everybody's favorite. I almost didn't want to put this in here because I'm sure all of us are a little bit sick in some form or fashion of talking about it. If you do one thing in people analytics, what do you measure? You measure attrition, right? That's all the organization cares about. And so in my experience, we as a people analytics team tend to veer down more slices of data are better. Let's slice this 7 ways a Sunday to just get as granular as possible. We can look at voluntary, we can look at involuntary. Where do retirements go? I don't know. Regrettable, non-regrettable, high performing, tenured versus non-tenured, POC versus non-POC, different generations, men versus women. And so it becomes very, very overwhelming. And at the end of the day, what does that tell us? Sure, it can spot some abnormalities. If women attrition is higher than men, that might cue something. It might cue questions. It might cue us to dig in a little bit deeper. But we're losing the forest for the trees there. It doesn't tell us the holistic story of what's happening. And so, as I go back to the impact on people, I want to zoom out. I don't want to lose sight of what actually matters in the things that we're measuring here at Northwestern Mutual or at any other company. Again, we look at attrition. I can't sit up here and lie and tell you we've got this awesome formula and we don't need to slice attrition all those different ways. We absolutely do. And people love looking at it and they ask all the right questions. And I don't think we'll ever get away from that. But my argument here is that we need a way to bundle this together so that it tells a more holistic story and doesn't just feed an appetite of curiosity that doesn't lead to impact, doesn't lead to decisions, and doesn't make a difference in the work that we're doing. So another example that we're looking at is an attrition index. I will go into how we're measuring this. What I will say with this, and I think it's intuitive to all of you, 2 people can leave an organization and have very different impacts as they leave the organization. When we report out on attrition, those 2 people show up identical for the most part. Again, depending on how many different slices you want to throw in there, they show up as 1-to-1. The reality is that impact feels very different to the organization. If we have a senior leader who is high performing, who is high potential, who is extremely tenured, who is a subject matter expert, that is going to leave a huge impact on the organization. And the typical ways that we measure attrition don't really account for some of that nuance. It shows up as just another exit. And so one of the things that we're working on developing at Northwestern Mutual is an attrition index. Again, if you look at this, you're gonna tell me, Brad, these are many of the same slices that you just flashed up that you said we shouldn't be slicing and dicing. The difference is we're kind of bundling this together to try to say, what is the impact of a given person leaving? We all know that there's a healthy amount of attrition that occurs, and some attrition is actually good. And so what this accounts for is some of that good attrition showing up as good attrition and not negatively impacting your score. And I say score of the attrition index. The last thing that I want to touch on, and it gets to the point of both succession health as well as our attrition index. There's an undercurrent, and I think all of us maybe wouldn't say this out loud, but there's a tendency to want to have attrition be 0, or even our attrition index to be 0. And we want our succession health to be 100%. The reality is that's absolutely silly. Can you imagine what it would be like if attrition was 0 in an organization? Even our attrition index, if that was 0. We've got no mobility in the organization. We've got nobody coming into the organization with a fresh set of eyes. We've got no poor performers that are leaving. It's bizarre. Same with internal or succession health. Right now, we're measuring it in a couple of different ways. We're really focused on senior directors, VPs, and above. Can you imagine if we had 100% healthy pipelines for all senior directors and above at your organization? We're not hiring from the outside at all in those areas. It's not realistic. It's also not the right thing to do for the organization. And so when we've rolled this out, one of the biggest challenges that we've had is that bias towards, I'm at 18%, like I need to be at 100%. So you get one of 2 pieces of feedback. One, this is a terrible measure. I don't know what you guys are doing. You don't know what you're talking about. There's that. Or I'm at 18, I need to get to 100. Like, tell me what I need to do to get to 100 and I'll just do it. And that showed up in working with our HR team, primarily HR business partners, in our law department. We have fairly typical of legal department. From a job architecture perspective, they're leveled fairly high. Most of them are individual contributors. Most of them are fairly tenured. They don't tend to come and go from NM. And so their succession health index was extremely low. It made all the sense in the world that it would be low. And so in working with that HR business partner, there was a tendency to say, we're at, and I'm making numbers up, 18% in succession health. That, like, we need to get higher. What do we need to do? And we challenge them to say, you might not need to be higher. 18% might be the right percent for you. The goal is not 100% in this. It's not for any part of the organization. So we shouldn't be thinking about it that way. Your goal should be what makes sense for your team, your department. And the reality is, our legal department shouldn't have much of a goal above 18%. We looked at their pipelines. We looked at who had slates, who had healthy slates. Most of them didn't need to have healthy slates. And so finding that internal-external mix is important. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there can't be this binary thinking of, we've got to be at 0 in attrition. We've got to be at 100% in internal succession health. There's nuance in that. And so how do we think about that differently? How do we set relevant goals, relevant targets for that part of the organization, that team in particular? So with that, I can close. We've got a couple minutes left for questions. I'll leave you with the thought-provoking question on the screen here of, are you measuring what matters? And are you making the right decisions or leading towards the right outcomes with the measures that you have? So with that, I can stop and see if there are any questions or final comments. Sure.
I've been a Northwestern mutual policyholder. I was wondering, for people analytics, does it make a difference that it's a mutual company, or the fact that a large part of the workforce are independent contractors who are the agents?
Yes.
Of the policy?
Yes. So it's a good distinction. So my experience at Northwestern Mutual, we separate what we call our home office and field office. Field office is what most people are going to interact with Northwestern Mutual through, our advisors. And so those are handled by a separate team. Our home office is all of the support. It's all of the tech and digital products that we're creating. It's folks like me, HR, finance, legal, all of those fun roles. So there is a difference in how we think about that. I, in full disclosure, don't know what the field does as they think about succession health. I know they are talking through succession pipelines and all of that. On the mutual question, I think it shows up in a lot of different ways. I've worked for public companies. I've worked for private companies. I've worked for a mutual company. There's good and bad associated with it. It's personal preference. I think there's a lot of benefits to working for a mutual company. I think there's a lot of benefits, candidly, between us of not working for public companies because you're not at the behest of quarterly earnings reports. But I think a lot of that shows up differently in different behaviors. It creates part of the culture that we have. I absolutely love it, but it might not be for everybody. There was a question over here.
In my experience, something like impact is usually assessed versus inferred or measured. So how do you account for subjectivity in impact measurement or assessment like that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I would say it shows up maybe a couple of different ways, and we're not quite there yet, because one of the things, and I'll go back way to my grad school stat days of like correlation doesn't equal causation, right? But one of the things we're beginning to look at is we might have healthy succession indexes across the organization. We also might not be promoting from within or having successors fill that. And that's really the measure and impact that we're after. And so I think there's an impact in terms of is our succession health index truly a leading indicator to internal movement and successors being named, or is it just an activity? The second part, and Philip, I think, mentioned it just on stage before me, is it's really hard to measure productivity of teams. And so I think there's maybe a holy grail that's there, the graphic that I flashed up of performance drop. How do you actually measure that? I think there's maybe proxies for it, but there's probably a lot more to evolve this to show up a little bit differently to really measure how well this is working and what's the impact as we do these leader transitions throughout the organization. But it's a great question. Yep.
I'm loud enough. Here we go. This idea around measure versus metric, and as soon as you set a target or a goal, it ceases to be a good measure.
Yeah.
Love the idea around of all this. How do you avoid that type of behavior? Again, I'm an 18%. I need to be at 100.
Yep.
How do are you all okay with the goal setting, or do we discourage that? How do you tackle that type of problem?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's premature here at NM because this is new, so we're starting to work through some of that. So I can't tell you, like, it's shown up and here's how we dealt with it. As a hypothetical, what we have done as preventative measures is talk through, like we did with the folks that support our legal department. You don't need to be at 100%. The story here is 18% for you healthy? And the other factor that goes into it maybe goes back to the last question of, are we just throwing people on slates and starting to cobble this up to show us that we've got healthy pipelines, but when there's actual movement, we're not seeing that come to fruition? That's the other telltale sign. And I think once we start getting the data there to say, we've got healthy pipelines over here, but there's still not successors moving in and we're still hiring a lot externally, there's a disconnect, that's gonna cue us to say, something's gone awry here and we need to dig in and figure out what's happening. All right, with that, we are done.